Welcome to This Week in the Future. First up in the news is a new open source model for Microsoft called Phi 1.5. So we covered Phi 1 a couple months ago on this series, but I think we should cover it again because it's a really interesting model with some interesting implications. It's very low parameter and it's been trained on excellent data that they actually call textbook quality data. So creating a small, super high quality data set rather than scraping the internet and getting every last Reddit thread from 1995. So the entire size of this model, because it has such a small data set, is 1.3 billion parameters, which is really small compared to just last week. We were talking about Falcon 180B. That's an enormous model. And the advantage of having a tiny amount of parameters is that it's really cheap to host. Some background here. It's Phi 1, but augmented with some more NLP synthetic text, and then some more testing was done on it. So we have a better understanding of what its capabilities are. So they assessed it against some benchmarks, testing like common sense, language understanding, logical reasoning, and it demonstrates a, quote, nearly state-of-the-art performance among models with less than 10 billion parameters. So it hasn't been compared on many tests to high parameter models like Falcon 180B or Llama 2 6.5B. I don't think that's really a fair comparison because it's almost like an entirely different category of model when you're talking about 1/100th of the parameter count. It's also not RLHF tuned in any way. It's a model that's been made really for hobbyists and researchers, which is really cool. I actually tested it myself on my own computer. I have to say the outputs seem a little bit canned. Doesn't output super helpful responses necessarily. It certainly does plenty of hallucinating despite being trained on the textbook quality model, but it also hasn't been RLHF tuned. So we would not expect the kinds of helpful responses that we see from a model like ChatGPT because it hasn't been through that tuning process yet. It's really cool to be able to host a model locally on my not server grade GPU. I just have a 3000 series RTX NVIDIA GPU. It actually outputs coherent sentences. It might not be that useful yet, but really cool to test with. And this model is going to be really excellent for hobbyists and for researchers. Stable Audio is the newest closed source model from Stability AI. This is an audio generation model, really a music generation model. And I wanted to bring it up because it actually sounds pretty good, especially for textural music. So that's electronic stuff like ambient music, techno music. It sounds decent. For white noise, it can also sound pretty good. I would call it totally passable background music and noise. It does have some limitations through the current web portal. You can only create 45-second clips max. I wouldn't call the music particularly compelling. And in particular, it really lacks crispness in instrumentals and vocals. How does it work? So Stability took a stable diffusion model. Stable diffusion is the same strategy that was used for models like the one for Midjourney for generating images. It's a really good, creative, generative model type that transforms random noise into some object that has a text description. They basically transported that stable diffusion model as it was used in the image generation application to an audio generation application. And they trained the model on 800,000 music tracks provided by a stock audio provider. I think it's worth noting that I did say that the music's a little boring. I think it's a little boring, but this could also be connected to the data set that it was trained on because stock audio tends to be not so interesting. And oftentimes you could describe it as background music because it is background music. So recently there's a Capitol Hill Summit for AI. There are a lot of top CEOs there from huge tech companies who made some statements. For example, Zuckerberg says Congress should engage with AI to support innovation and safeguards. It's an emerging technology. There are important equities to balance here, and the government is ultimately responsible for that. Elon Musk has come up with this idea of needing an AI referee. He thinks it's important for large companies or any companies that are developing AI to have some kind of AI referee. He added that a regulator would ensure that companies take actions that are safe and in the interest of the general public. I agree. I think that's important. I think it's also unfortunate that the companies themselves are not beholden to taking safe actions in the interest of the general public, but I suppose that's what regulation is for. There are also more and more companies signing the White House's AI pledge, which note has no consequences if you break the AI pledge. It is excellent PR. I think we're going to need to start doing an OpenAI segment every week because there's just so much news coming out of them. There's a conference in San Francisco, OpenAI's first conference for developers and people working with OpenAI tools with live demos, workshops, plans for the future, etc. There's a new office for OpenAI opening in Dublin. If you want to make $500,000 a year and you have a PhD and a high H score, I suggest you apply. Last piece of news from Coca-Cola. We have the first ever AI generated food. As our series is titled This Week in the Future in Good Conscience, we have to cover the Coca-Cola Year 3000 flavor, which is a look into the year 3000 where humanity and technology are more connected than ever. Some AI model generated the flavors for this as well as the packaging. You can taste the future now through Coca-Cola Year 3000, according to them. Take a look at the ingredients. It's got some Coca-Cola classics like carbonated water, high fructose corn syrup, caramel color, natural flavors, phosphoric acid, and caffeine. So it's good to see that the AI has not inserted any lethal doses of any sorts of unwanted chemicals. And in the nutrition facts, things look pretty standard. A good 65 grams of added sugars, which is about 130% of your recommended daily intake. Earlier, I said that there's no lethal doses of anything. You might consider 130% of your daily intake of sugar lethal, but really, this is a gimmick. But I do think it's funny. I haven't personally had a Coca-Cola Year 3000, but I've bought into it. And the next time I see one in a store, I'm certainly going to try it to see what kind of tastes AI has in store for us in the future. That's all for this week. If you enjoyed, tune in next week for another episode of This Week in the Future.